My hands trembled as I reached across the table and switched my plate with Ramona's. The roasted chicken, the mashed potatoes, the green beans she'd spent all afternoon preparing, now sitting in front of her instead of me. She blinked, confused for just a second, but I smiled sweetly and said, "You've worked so hard on this meal, Mother Ramona. You deserve the first taste." Her face went pale. Brett's fork clattered against his plate. The whole dining room went silent except for the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. I picked up my water glass with shaking fingers and took a long sip, never breaking eye contact with the woman who'd been poisoning me for 6 months. 6 months of hell. 6 months of thinking I was losing my mind while my own husband and his mother slowly murdered me at Sunday dinners. But not tonight. Tonight, they were going to taste their own medicine. Ramona stared at the plate in front of her like it was a coiled snake. Brett's uncle cleared his throat. His aunt asked if everything was okay. I just kept smiling, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Ramona's hand moved toward her fork, then stopped. She looked at Brett. Brett looked at me. And in that moment, I knew they both understood what I'd done. "Aren't you hungry?" I asked, my voice sickly sweet. "You always tell me I need to eat more. That I'm too skinny. That a good wife finishes everything on her plate." The color drained from Brett's face completely. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Ramona's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting between me and the food, calculating, panicking. The rest of the family kept eating, oblivious, making small talk about football and someone's new car. They had no idea they were sitting at a table with 2 attempted murderers. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. 25 minutes passed. I counted every single second. I made conversation, laughed at jokes, complimented Ramona's decorating. All while watching her push food around her plate, pretending to eat but not taking a single bite. Brett had gone completely silent, his usual chattiness replaced by a thick, suffocating terror. His hands gripped the edge of the table so tight his knuckles turned white. Then at minute 30, Ramona gasped. Her hand flew to her throat. Her face twisted in pain and she lurched forward, knocking her wine glass over. Red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like blood. Brett jumped up, shouting her name, but his eyes were on me, wide with horror and something else. Guilt. Pure, devastating guilt. "Call 911. Someone screamed. Ramona collapsed sideways in her chair, her body convulsing, foam forming at the corners of her mouth. Chaos erupted around the table. People were crying, panicking, pulling out phones. Brett's uncle started CPR. And I just sat there, perfectly calm, watching the woman who tried to kill me finally understand what she'd been doing to me. Because 6 months ago, I'd been healthy, happy, in love with a man I thought would protect me. But that was before the Sunday dinners started making me sick. Before my hair began falling out in clumps. Before I couldn't remember simple words or where I'd put my keys. Before I started waking up at 3 in the morning, vomiting until there was nothing left. And the whole time, they smiled at me, fed me, told me they loved me. While the arsenic they'd been slipping into my food slowly destroyed me from the inside out. The sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Brett dropped to his knees beside his mother, but he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was staring at me with pure terror in his eyes. Because he knew. He knew I'd figured it out. He knew I'd switched the plates on purpose. And he knew that when those paramedics walked through that door, his entire world was about to crumble. What he didn't know yet was that I'd called someone else too. Someone who'd been waiting for this exact moment. Someone with a badge and handcuffs who was about to make sure neither of them ever hurt anyone again. 6 months earlier, I'd stood in this same dining room and felt nothing but gratitude. Brett had swept me off my feet 3 years before. Met me at a coffee shop where I'd spilled my latte all over his laptop. He'd laughed it off, asked me to dinner to make up for it, and by our 3rd date I knew he was the one. He was kind, successful, attentive. Everything I'd ever wanted. When he proposed on a beach in Florida, I cried happy tears for 20 minutes straight. His mother Ramona had seemed thrilled too. She'd hugged me at our engagement party and called me daughter. Said she'd always wanted a girl. Brett was her only child. His father had left when he was young, and she'd raised him alone, working 2 jobs, sacrificing everything. Their bond was intense, sure, but I thought it was beautiful. A son who loved his mother. What could be wrong with that? The Sunday dinners started 2 months after the wedding. Ramona insisted. Family tradition, she called it. Every week without fail, we'd drive to her house in the suburbs, and she'd cook this elaborate meal. Pot roast, lasagna, fried chicken. Always my favorite foods, she said. Always made with love. I'd eat until I was stuffed, laughing at Brett's childhood stories, helping her wash dishes while he watched football with his uncles. For the first month, everything was perfect. I felt welcomed. Loved. Part of something bigger than just me and Brett. Then the headaches started. Just small ones at first, Monday mornings after Sunday dinner. I blamed it on the wine. Then came the nausea. The exhaustion. The weird metallic taste in my mouth that wouldn't go away no matter how many times I brushed my teeth. Maybe you're pregnant, Ramona suggested one Sunday, her eyes lighting up with hope. That would be such a blessing. But the pregnancy tests kept coming back negative. Doctor after doctor found nothing wrong. They suggested stress, maybe an autoimmune disorder, possibly anxiety. They ran blood tests that showed slightly elevated levels of something. I can't even remember what now, but nothing definitive. Nothing that explained why I felt like I was dying. Brett was supportive at first. He'd rub my back when I threw up. Made me soup. Drove me to appointments. But after a few months, I started noticing small changes. The way his jaw tightened when I mentioned feeling sick again. How he'd sigh when I said I needed to cancel plans because I was too exhausted. Little comments like maybe it's all in your head, or you need to try harder to stay positive. His patience was wearing thin, I thought. I was becoming a burden. So I tried harder. Smiled more. Pretended I felt better than I did. Forced myself to eat at those Sunday dinners even when my stomach churned and my head pounded because Ramona worked so hard on the food and I didn't want to seem ungrateful. That's when I started noticing them. The looks. Brett and Ramona would exchange these quick glances across the table when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Whispered conversations in the kitchen that stopped abruptly when I walked in. Phone calls Brett would take outside, coming back inside with his face flushed and his voice too cheerful. One Tuesday afternoon, I came home early from a doctor's appointment, another useless visit where they found nothing wrong, and heard Brett on the phone in his office. The door was cracked open. I stood in the hallway, groceries still in my hands, and listened to him say, "She's getting worse, Mom. The doctors still don't suspect anything. We just need to be patient." My blood ran cold. Patient about what? Suspect what? I pushed the door open and he spun around, guilt flashing across his face before he smiled and said he was just updating his mom on my health. Nothing suspicious. Nothing wrong. Just a concerned husband talking to his concerned mother about his sick wife. But something in my gut twisted. Something dark and ugly that I didn't want to acknowledge. Because acknowledging it meant admitting that the man I loved, the man I'd married, might be lying to me about something terrible. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying that phone call in my mind, analyzing every word, every inflection. We just need to be patient. The doctors don't suspect anything. What didn't they suspect? Why would doctors need to suspect anything unless there was something to suspect? By morning, I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. Stress and illness were making me imagine things. Brett loved me. His mother loved me. They were worried about my health, that's all. That's all it could be. But then I found the receipt. Brett had left his jacket on the back of a chair and I'd picked it up to hang it in the closet. A piece of paper fell out of the pocket. Just a normal store receipt. Dated 2 months earlier. And on it, in black and white, were 2 items that made my heart stop: antifreeze, heavy-duty rat poison. I stood in our bedroom holding that receipt, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. There had to be an explanation. Maybe we had rats in the garage I didn't know about. Maybe his car needed coolant. But Brett had never mentioned rats. And his car was new, still under warranty. He'd have taken it to the dealership for any mechanical issues. My mind raced through every possible innocent reason while my gut screamed that none of them were true. I took a picture of the receipt with my phone and put it back exactly where I'd found it. Then I sat on the edge of our bed, the bed we'd picked out together, the bed where we'd made love and made plans for our future, and I cried. Not because I knew what was happening yet, but because some deep, primal part of me was starting to understand. The next Sunday dinner, I watched. Really watched. Ramona brought out the food and made a big show of serving everyone, but I noticed she served me first. Always me first. And she always complimented how much I ate, encouraged me to have seconds, looked disappointed if I didn't clean my plate. Brett would watch me eat with this strange expression I'd never paid attention to before. Not quite worry. Not quite hope. Something in between that made my skin crawl. I ate everything that night, smiling and laughing like always. Then I went home and threw it all up in our bathroom while Brett watched TV in the living room. The vomiting had become routine by then. So routine that he didn't even come check on me anymore. Just called through the door asking if I was okay, accepting my weak yes without question. My hair had started falling out in chunks. I'd find it on my pillow in the morning, in the shower drain, caught in my brush. I was down 15 pounds, my skin had this grayish tint, and my memory was getting terrifying. I'd forget words mid-sentence. Forget where I was driving. Wake up with no memory of going to bed. One morning I found the stove on, a pot burned black, and no recollection of cooking anything. Maybe you should see a therapist, Brett suggested gently, taking the ruined pot from my hands. This level of stress isn't normal. It's affecting your mind. His concern seemed so genuine. His touch so tender. And I wanted so desperately to believe he was right. That this was all in my head. That I was just anxious and sick and imagining shadows where there was only light. But then my best friend Kira came over for coffee. We'd been friends since college, and she hadn't visited in months because I'd been too sick to have company. When she walked through the door and saw me, her face went white. Sienna, oh my God. You look, she stopped herself, but I knew what she was thinking. I looked like I was dying. We sat in my kitchen and I told her everything. The sickness, the memory loss, the doctors finding nothing, Brett's weird behavior. And then, in a whisper, I told her about the receipt. About the feeling in my gut that something was terribly, horribly wrong. Kira listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with every word. You need to stop eating at his mother's house, she said firmly. Right now. This week. Make an excuse. I started to protest. It would seem so rude, so suspicious, but she grabbed my hand across the table. Sienna, listen to yourself. You're describing symptoms of poisoning. And your husband bought rat poison and antifreeze 2 months ago. The word hung in the air between us. Poisoning. I'd been dancing around it in my mind for days, refusing to let the thought fully form. But hearing Kira say it out loud made it real. Made it something I couldn't unsee or unhear or pretend wasn't possible. That's insane, I whispered. Brett loves me. He wouldn't. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it anymore. Because if he loved me, why had I heard him say the doctors don't suspect anything? What was there to suspect unless there was something to hide? Kira stayed with me for 3 hours, and together we made a plan. I would skip the next Sunday dinner, claim I had the flu, see if my symptoms improved. If they did, if I felt even a little bit better, then we'd know. And if we knew, we'd go to the police. It seemed so simple sitting there in my kitchen with my best friend's hand in mine. So clear-cut and obvious. But that night, when Brett came home from work and kissed my forehead and asked what I wanted for dinner, I almost chickened out. Because looking at his face, the face I'd woken up next to for 3 years, I couldn't reconcile the man I loved with the monster Kira was suggesting he might be. I'm not feeling well, I told him. I think I'm coming down with something. Maybe we should skip Sunday dinner this week. His face changed. Just for a second. Just a flash of something cold and calculating before the mask of concern slid back into place. Mom will be so disappointed, he said slowly. She's been planning this meal all week. Can't you just push through? You know how much these dinners mean to her. The guilt trip was automatic. Well practiced. How many times had he done this before, I wondered. How many times had he manipulated me into eating food that was killing me? I really can't, I said, standing my ground even though my hands were shaking. I'm sorry. Tell her I'll make it up to her next week. Brett's jaw tightened. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear? Anger? Calculation? Then he smiled and kissed my cheek and said of course, I should rest, my health was the most important thing. But that night, I heard him on the phone again. And this time, I recorded it. I used the voice memo app on my phone, standing in the hallway outside our bedroom at 2 a.m, while Brett paced inside talking in hushed, urgent tones. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was afraid the phone would pick it up. Afraid he'd hear me breathing on the other side of the door. Afraid of what I was about to confirm. She's refusing to come to dinner, Brett hissed into the phone. I tried everything but she won't budge. What if she knows? Silence while Ramona responded. Then, no, I don't think we can wait any longer. She's not getting sick fast enough. We need to increase it. Another pause. The life insurance doesn't pay out unless she's dead, Mom. 6 months of this and she's still walking around. We're running out of time. I clasped my hand over my mouth to keep from gasping. The phone nearly slipped from my trembling fingers. Life insurance. Running out of time. Increase it. Every word was a knife to my chest, carving out the last remaining pieces of the life I thought I had. I'll figure something out, Brett continued. Maybe I can make her dinner at home. She trusts me. She'll eat whatever I give her. He laughed then. Actually laughed. A cold, cruel sound I'd never heard come from his mouth before. Don't worry. By Christmas, this will all be over. We'll have the money, and I can finally be free. Free. He wanted to be free of me. And he was willing to kill me to do it. I backed away from the door, my legs barely holding me up, and stumbled into the guest bathroom. I sat on the closed toilet lid and played back the recording with shaking hands, making sure it had captured everything. It had. Every damning word. The next morning, I called in sick to work. The moment Brett left for his office, I was on my laptop searching for private investigators. I found one with good reviews, a former cop named Holland who specialized in domestic cases. When I called and told him I suspected my husband was trying to kill me, he didn't laugh or dismiss me. He just asked how soon I could come to his office. I met him that afternoon in a small building downtown, the recording ready on my phone. Holland was in his 50s, graying hair, tired eyes that had seen too much. He listened to the entire thing without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each word. When it finished, he sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. How long have you been sick? He asked. I told him. 6 months of progressive symptoms, dozens of doctor visits, no diagnosis. He nodded slowly. And your husband bought rat poison and antifreeze when? I showed him the receipt photo. He studied it, then looked at me with something like pity in his eyes. Mrs. Pierce, I'm going to be straight with you. What you're describing sounds like arsenic poisoning. Antifreeze contains ethylene glycol, which can be lethal in small doses over time. Rat poison often contains arsenic or similar compounds. If someone's been slipping this into your food for 6 months, the only reason you're still alive is because they've been using small amounts. He paused. But according to that phone call, they're planning to increase the dosage. Which means you don't have much time. The room spun. I gripped the arms of my chair and tried to breathe. Arsenic. They were poisoning me with arsenic. The man I loved. The mother-in-law who called me daughter. They were murdering me slowly, patiently, waiting for me to die so they could collect life insurance money I didn't even know existed. What do I do? I whispered. Holland leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. First, you stop eating anything they give you. Anything. Not food, not drinks, nothing that passes through their hands. Second, we gather evidence. I need you to install security cameras in your house, hidden ones they won't notice. We need video of him tampering with your food. Third, I'm going to pull records on this life insurance policy. Find out how much it's worth and when it was taken out. And fourth, he pulled out a business card. You need to talk to this detective. Tell him everything. Start building a case. I took the card with numb fingers. Detective Morrison, Homicide Division. Homicide. I breathed. Holland's expression didn't change. That's what this is, Mrs. Pierce. Attempted homicide. And if we don't stop it now, it's going to become a successful one. I left his office in a daze and went straight to an electronics store. Bought 3 small cameras that looked like phone chargers and a smoke detector. Went home and installed them in the kitchen, bedroom, and living room. Then I sat on my couch and stared at the wall, trying to process that my entire life had become a crime scene. That night, Brett came home with takeout. Got your favorite, he said, smiling as he unpacked Chinese food. Thought it might make you feel better. My favorite. Kung Pao chicken from the place down the street. He set it in front of me with chopsticks and a napkin, watching expectantly as I opened the container. The smell made my stomach turn, but not from illness. From fear. From the knowledge that this food, this innocent-looking takeout, might contain the poison that was supposed to kill me. I picked up the chopsticks, watching Brett watch me. His eyes were intense, focused. Waiting. Actually, I said, setting the chopsticks down, I'm not hungry. My stomach's still upset. His face fell. Then hardened. Just for a second before he rearranged it into concern. You need to eat something, Sienna. You're wasting away. He pushed the container closer. Just a few bites. For me. The manipulation was so clear now. So obvious. How had I missed it before? How had I let him convince me to poison myself week after week after week? I'll eat later, I said firmly. I'm going to bed. I stood and walked to our bedroom, feeling his eyes boring into my back. Behind me, I heard him exhale sharply. Heard the takeout container hit the counter. Heard him mutter something under his breath that sounded like a curse. And later that night, when I reviewed the camera footage on my phone, I watched him dump something from a small vial into my Kung Pao chicken. Watched him stir it carefully, making sure it dissolved completely. Watched him throw the vial in the trash and cover it with paper towels. All captured in perfect, damning detail. I had my evidence. Now I just needed to figure out how to make them pay. The next morning, I drove to the police station with Holland's business card clutched in my hand and a USB drive containing the camera footage in my pocket. My entire body felt like a live wire, terrified and electric and barely holding together. Detective Morrison was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. When I told him why I was there, those eyes locked onto mine with complete focus. I showed him everything. The recording of Brett's phone call. The receipt for poison. The camera footage of him tampering with my food. Morrison watched it all twice, making notes, his expression growing darker. When the second viewing finished, he sat back and rubbed his face. This is one of the most clear-cut attempted murder cases I've ever seen, he said quietly. And one of the most evil. How long did you say this has been going on? 6 months, I told him. 6 months of Sunday dinners and special meals and slowly dying while they smiled at me. Morrison pulled up something on his computer, typed for a moment, then turned the screen toward me. Is this you? It was a life insurance policy. $500,000. Beneficiary, Brett Donovan Pierce. Taken out 7 months ago, 1 month before I got sick, with my forged signature on the application. 7 months of planning. 7 months of setting me up to die. The betrayal was so massive I couldn't even process it. It felt like drowning in open air. I never signed this, I whispered. Morrison nodded. Forgery on top of attempted murder. We could arrest him today with what you've shown me. But then he paused, leaning forward. However, if you want to make absolutely certain this case is airtight, if you want to catch them both in the act where they can't claim it was accidental or that you're lying, we need more. More. I'd given him video evidence of poisoning and he wanted more. But I understood. I needed more too. I needed Brett and Ramona to confess. To admit what they'd done in a way they could never take back. To face public consequences that would destroy them the way they'd tried to destroy me. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Morrison's expression turned calculating. "Go to that Sunday dinner. Wear a wire. Get them talking. And," he paused, seeming to weigh his words, "if you're brave enough, switch your plate with your mother-in-law's. The moment she eats the poisoned food, we'll have paramedics standing by. She'll survive, we won't let her die, but she'll be sick enough that we can prove what was in that food. And they'll both be caught red-handed." It was risky, dangerous. Required me to sit at that table one more time and play the role of oblivious victim while wearing a wire that could be discovered at any moment. But it was also perfect. Poetic. Let Ramona taste her own medicine. Let Brett watch his plan crumble in real time. Let them both understand, in that moment before the police took them away, that I'd known. That I'd outplayed them. I had a week to prepare. Holland helped me practice acting natural while wired. Morrison coordinated with paramedics and positioned officers nearby. Kira wanted to be there, but I refused. Too dangerous, too obvious. This had to look like a normal Sunday dinner right up until it wasn't. The hardest part was living with Brett that week. Sleeping next to him. Letting him touch me. Pretending I didn't know he was a monster wearing my husband's face. He made me dinner twice more, and both times I found excuses not to eat. Both times he grew more frustrated. More desperate. On Friday night, he sat me down with this serious expression and said we needed to talk about my health. "You're not getting better, Sienna. If anything, you're getting worse. Maybe," he hesitated, playing the concerned husband so perfectly, "maybe you should stay with your parents for a while. Get some rest. Let them take care of you." He wanted me gone. Wanted me under his mother's roof where they could control my food completely. Where they could finish what they'd started. "Actually," I said, smiling sweetly, "I'm feeling much better this week. Good enough to go to Sunday dinner tomorrow. I know how much it means to your mom." His face lit up. Genuine relief and happiness that made me sick. He actually thought he was going to win. Thought he'd get away with murder. "That's great, honey. She's been so worried about you. We both have." He kissed my forehead and I wanted to scream. Wanted to claw his eyes out. Wanted to ask him how he could do this to someone he'd promised to love forever. But I just smiled and said I couldn't wait to taste her cooking again. Sunday morning, Morrison's team came to the house while Brett was out jogging. They fitted me with a wire so small it was barely visible, tucked under my clothes. Tested it 3 times to make sure it would capture everything. Gave me a panic button disguised as a bracelet in case anything went wrong. Positioned ambulances 2 blocks away and plainclothes officers in a car across from Ramona's house. "If at any point you feel unsafe, you hit that button and we come in immediately," Morrison said. "Your safety is more important than the case. Understand?" I understood. But I wasn't going to hit that button. I was going to see this through to the bitter end. When Brett and I pulled up to his mother's house that afternoon, my heart was racing so fast I thought he'd notice. But he just squeezed my hand and said he was glad I was feeling up to this. Glad I was finally eating again. The words felt like acid in my ears. Ramona answered the door in her apron, flour on her hands, looking like every wholesome mother-in-law in every family photo. "Sienna, you look wonderful. Come in, come in. Dinner's almost ready." She hugged me and I hugged her back, feeling the wire press against my chest, knowing every word was being recorded. The other family members arrived. Brett's uncle and aunt, 2 cousins I barely knew. Everyone settled around the dining table making small talk while Ramona brought out the food. The same food that had been killing me for months. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, rolls. All arranged beautifully on matching dishes. She served me first. Just like always. Set the plate in front of me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Eat up, dear. You need your strength." I looked at that plate, at the poison hidden in plain sight, and felt a surge of rage so powerful it almost choked me. But I smiled. Said thank you. And waited for the perfect moment to make my move. I waited until everyone had their food. waited until the conversation was flowing and people were relaxed and distracted. Then I reached across the table, my hand steady despite my racing heart, and switched my plate with Ramona's. The scrape of ceramic against wood cut through the chatter like a gunshot. Everyone looked up. Brett's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Ramona's eyes went wide, locked on the plate that was now in front of her, the plate that had been meant for me. The plate she'd personally prepared and personally served and personally poisoned. "You've worked so hard on this meal, Mother Ramona," I said, my voice sweet as honey. "You deserve the first taste. I insist." The wire hidden under my shirt captured every word, every breath, every second of the silence that followed. Ramona's face drained of color so fast I thought she might faint right then. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. She looked at Brett with pure panic in her eyes and Brett looked at me with something worse. Recognition. Understanding. The sudden, crushing realization that I knew everything. "That's so thoughtful of you, dear," Brett's aunt said, completely oblivious. "But Ramona always eats last. It's her way." She laughed and reached for the breadbasket. The normal conversation tried to restart around us, but the three of us, me, Brett, Ramona, we were locked in our own private war. "I really think she should eat," I pressed, never breaking eye contact with my mother-in-law. "She looks pale. Like she might be coming down with something. Don't you think, Brett?" His name came out sharp. Accusatory. He flinched. "Maybe we should," Brett started, half rising from his chair, but I cut him off. "Sit down, honey. Let your mother enjoy her meal. She's been looking forward to this all week." The emphasis on her meal was deliberate, pointed. Ramona's hands trembled as they hovered over her fork and knife. She knew if she didn't eat, it would look suspicious. But if she did eat, she'd be consuming the very poison she'd intended for me. The seconds ticked by like hours. Sweat beaded on Brett's forehead. Ramona's breathing grew shallow and rapid. And I just sat there, smiling, watching them squirm. Watching them understand that their perfect plan had turned into a perfect trap. "I'm not very hungry," Ramona finally whispered. "I think I'll save mine for—" "Nonsense," I interrupted. "You worked so hard. Just a few bites. For me." I threw Brett's words back at them. The same manipulation they'd used on me dozens of times. Ramona looked at her son desperately, but Brett was frozen, his mind clearly racing through options and finding none that didn't end in disaster. Brett's uncle, growing uncomfortable with the tension, cleared his throat. "Everything okay over there?" The question hung in the air. This was it. The moment where everything would either unravel or I'd lose my nerve. But I'd come too far. Suffered too much. They'd tried to kill me and I'd survived, and now it was time for justice. "Everything's perfect," I said brightly. Then I picked up my water glass, the glass from Ramona's place setting, the one I'd switched with mine, and took a long drink. "Aren't you going to eat, Mother Ramona? It's getting cold." She picked up her fork with shaking hands. Stabbed a piece of chicken. Brought it slowly toward her mouth while Brett made a strangled sound in his throat. And then, just as the fork was an inch from her lips, she dropped it. The fork clattered against the plate and Ramona pushed back from the table. "I need to use the restroom," she gasped, and fled from the dining room. Brett immediately jumped up and followed her. I could hear their frantic whispers from the hallway. The wire was getting all of it. Every panicked word. "She knows," Ramona hissed. "She switched the plates on purpose. Oh God, Brett, she knows what we've been doing." "Keep your voice down," Brett snapped back. Just stay calm. We'll figure this out." "Figure it out? How do we figure this out? If she goes to the police?" "She won't. She can't prove anything. It's just food. We'll say she's paranoid, that her illness is making her imagine things." But his voice shook with doubt. They both knew I had proof. They just didn't know how much. I stayed at the table, making small talk with the confused relatives while my heart hammered against my ribs. 10 minutes passed. 15. Then I heard the front door open and close. Footsteps running. Brett appeared back in the dining room, his face flushed and guilty. "Mom's not feeling well," he announced. "She went to lie down. Maybe we should head home," Sienna. Let her rest. He wanted to leave. Wanted to get me away from this house and these witnesses and figure out damage control. But I wasn't done yet. Actually, I feel fine, I said. Better than I've felt in months. Isn't that strange? The question was loaded. Brett's jaw clenched. In fact, I've been feeling better all week. Ever since I stopped eating your cooking. The relatives went silent. Brett's aunt set down her fork slowly, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. I could see her mind working, connecting dots she didn't want to connect. What are you saying? Brett asked carefully. Too carefully. His eyes darted to the door like he was calculating escape routes. I'm saying, I started, but then Ramona screamed. A high, piercing shriek from somewhere deeper in the house. Everyone jumped up, chairs scraping, people rushing toward the sound. I followed, knowing exactly what I'd find. Ramona was in the kitchen, doubled over the sink, vomiting violently. Her face was gray, sweat pouring down her temples, her whole body shaking. She must have eaten something. Maybe tasted the food while cooking. Maybe sampled it to make sure the poison was properly mixed. Whatever the reason, it was working. Call 911. Brett's uncle shouted, pulling out his phone. Brett stood in the doorway, frozen in horror, watching his mother suffer the same fate he'd intended for me. And in that moment, I felt no pity, no sympathy, only cold, hard satisfaction. The ambulance arrived within minutes, because Morrison's team had been waiting 2 blocks away, ready for exactly this. The paramedics rushed in with their equipment, asking questions about what she'd eaten, what her symptoms were. Ramona could barely speak through the convulsions, just kept vomiting and gasping. And then the police arrived. Not uniformed officers but Detective Morrison himself, walking through that front door with his badge out and his expression grim. Brett's face went white as a sheet. What's going on? Brett's uncle demanded. Why are the police here? Morrison looked straight at me. I nodded. And then I told them everything. For 6 months, I said, my voice ringing clear through Ramona's living room while the paramedics worked on her in the kitchen. My husband and his mother have been poisoning my food. Arsenic. Antifreeze. Rat poison mixed into Sunday dinners and special meals at home. They took out a $500,000 life insurance policy on me with a forged signature, and then they slowly tried to murder me to collect it. The room erupted. Brett's uncle stepped back like I'd slapped him. His aunt covered her mouth with her hand. The cousins started talking over each other, demanding to know if this was some kind of joke. But Brett just stood there with his eyes closed, his whole body rigid, knowing it was over. That's insane, he finally said, but his voice was weak. Defeated. Sienna, your illness has made you paranoid. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking perfectly clearly, I shot back. And I have proof. Video of you putting poison in my food. Audio recordings of you and your mother planning my death. Documentation of the forged insurance policy. And, I gestured toward the kitchen where Ramona was being loaded onto a stretcher. Whatever they find in her system right now will match what they've been putting in mine for 6 months. Morrison stepped forward, his voice official and cold. Brett Pierce, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and forgery. He started reading Miranda rights while pulling out handcuffs. Brett's face crumbled. He actually started crying. I'm sorry, he sobbed, looking at me with tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry, Sienna. I didn't want to do it. Mom said we had no choice. The business was failing, she'd lost everything in bad investments, we needed the money. His excuses poured out in a pathetic rush. You had a choice, I said quietly. You could have gotten a loan. Filed bankruptcy. Asked for help. You chose murder instead. You chose to poison your wife, the woman you promised to love and protect, because it was easier than admitting failure. The paramedics wheeled Ramona past us on the stretcher. She was barely conscious, an oxygen mask over her face, for already in her arm. But her eyes were open, and when they met mine, I saw pure hatred there. Not remorse. Not guilt. Just rage that I'd survived. That I'd outsmarted her. You ruined everything, she rasped through the mask. You were never good enough for my son. Never good enough for this family. I should have used more. Should have made sure. Her voice cut off as another wave of nausea hit her. Even dying, she couldn't stop being cruel. Ramona Pierce, you're also under arrest, Morrison said, following the stretcher out. She'll be treated at the hospital and then transported to county jail. Both of you will be charged with attempted murder in the first degree. Brett's relatives stood in shocked silence as the police led Brett out in handcuffs. His uncle tried to say something, to defend him maybe, or ask questions, but no words came. What could you say when you discovered your nephew was a would-be killer? That your family dinner table had been a crime scene for months? I followed them outside, needing to see it. Needing to watch Brett get put in the back of a police car. Needing visual confirmation that this nightmare was finally ending. The neighbors had come out of their houses, drawn by the sirens and commotion. They stood on their lawns watching, whispering. By tomorrow, the whole neighborhood would know what Brett and Ramona had done. As the police car pulled away, Brett looked at me through the window one last time. I expected to feel something. Sadness, maybe. Anger. Vindication. But I felt nothing. The man I'd loved had died months ago, if he'd ever existed at all. This person in the police car was a stranger. A criminal. A monster wearing a familiar face. Kira pulled up as the ambulance left, running across the lawn to wrap me in a fierce hug. I was listening to the whole thing on the wire, she said into my hair. You were so brave. So strong. I'm so proud of you. I finally let myself cry then, collapsing against my best friend while the weight of 6 months came crashing down. Morrison approached us, his expression softer now. You did good, Mrs. Pierce. That recording is going to put them away for a long time. The DA will want to meet with you tomorrow to go over your testimony, but for tonight, go home. Rest. This part is over. This part. Because there was still the trial ahead. Still the divorce. Still the long process of healing from what they'd done. But standing there on Ramona's lawn with sirens fading in the distance and Kira's arms around me, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Safe. I felt safe. Brett's uncle came outside, his face aged 10 years in the last hour. I'm sorry, he said quietly. If we'd known, if any of us had suspected, he couldn't finish. What could he have done? They'd been so careful. So patient. So good at hiding their evil behind smiles and Sunday dinners. It's not your fault, I told him. They fooled everyone. That's what made them dangerous. He nodded, tears in his eyes, and went back inside to call the rest of the family. To tell them their Sunday dinner tradition was built on attempted murder. Kira drove me home, to the house I'd shared with Brett, though not for much longer. I'd already decided to sell it. Buy something new. Somewhere without memories of poison and lies. Start over completely. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my body exhausted but my mind racing. It was over. Actually over. Brett and Ramona were in custody. The poison was out of my system. The truth was exposed. I'd survived something that should have killed me. But the thing that kept running through my mind wasn't relief or victory. It was the question I'd been avoiding for months. How had I missed it? How had I loved someone capable of this? What did that say about me, about my judgment, about my ability to trust anyone ever again? I didn't have answers. Maybe I never would. But as I finally drifted off to sleep, I made myself a promise. I would never again ignore my instincts. Never again silence the voice in my gut that said something was wrong. Never again put being polite or accommodating above being safe. They tried to kill me, but they'd failed. And that failure was going to cost them everything. The trial started 3 months later. 3 months of medical treatment to flush the remaining poison from my system, therapy to process the trauma, and countless meetings with prosecutors building their case. My hair was starting to grow back. The color had returned to my face. I'd gained back the weight I'd lost. Physically, I was healing. Emotionally was another story. The courtroom was packed. Media had picked up the story, husband and mother-in-law accused of poisoning wife for insurance money. And it had gone viral. Everyone wanted to see the monsters who'd tried to kill me. Brett sat at the defense table looking small and broken in his suit. Ramona sat beside her own lawyer, her face hard and unrepentant. The prosecutor was a woman named Valerie Chen, sharp and fierce, who'd promised me she'd make them pay. She started her opening statement by holding up a photo of me from 7 months ago, healthy, smiling, full of life. Then she held up a photo from 6 months later, taken right before I'd figured out what was happening. The difference was shocking. I looked like a corpse. "This is what 6 months of poisoning does to a human body," Valerie said, her voice ringing through the courtroom. 6 months of arsenic and ethylene glycol deliberately administered by the two people Sienna Pierce trusted most in the world. Her husband. Her mother-in-law. The people who were supposed to love and protect her. The evidence came next. The video footage of Brett poisoning my food, played on a large screen for everyone to see. The audio recording of their phone conversation, Brett's voice saying the life insurance doesn't pay out unless she's dead. The forged insurance policy. The receipt for rat poison and antifreeze. Medical expert testimony explaining how close I'd come to dying. Another month, maybe 2, and my organs would have failed completely. Brett's lawyer tried to argue diminished capacity, that Ramona had manipulated him, that he was under her control and not thinking clearly. But the prosecution destroyed that defense with Brett's own words. "I can finally be free," he'd said on that recording. He'd wanted this. He'd chosen this. Ramona's lawyer went with temporary insanity, claiming financial stress had caused a psychotic break. But then the prosecution revealed something that changed everything. Something even I hadn't known. "We'd like to call Gary Whitmore to the stand," Valerie announced. A man in his 60s walked to the witness stand, looking nervous. I'd never seen him before in my life. But when Valerie asked him to identify himself, my blood ran cold. "I'm Ramona Pierce's ex-husband," he said. "We were married for 15 years. Divorced 10 years ago." He paused, swallowing hard. "She poisoned me too." The courtroom exploded. The judge had to bang his gavel 3 times to restore order. I sat in my seat, stunned, as Gary Whitmore told his story. How he'd gotten mysteriously sick during the last 2 years of their marriage. How doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. How Ramona had been so loving and attentive, always making him special meals, always encouraging him to eat. How he'd finally divorced her because he couldn't take the sickness anymore. And within weeks of leaving, he'd miraculously recovered. "I thought it was stress," he said, his voice shaking. "I thought leaving the marriage had cured me. But when I saw the news about what happened to Sienna, I realized. Ramona had been poisoning me too. 4 years. I just got out before she could finish the job." Valerie presented more evidence. 2 other women who'd dated Ramona's brother and cousin, both of whom had experienced mysterious illnesses during their relationships. Both of whom had been encouraged to eat meals prepared by Ramona. Both of whom had recovered after ending those relationships. A pattern spanning decades. A serial poisoner who'd been operating in plain sight, hiding behind the mask of a caring mother and family member. This wasn't a crime of passion, Valerie argued in her closing statement. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated, premeditated, systematic murder that failed only because Sienna Pierce was smart enough and brave enough to figure it out before it was too late. Ramona Pierce has been poisoning people for years. Brett Pierce knew exactly what he was doing. And they both need to be held accountable. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, their verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Brett got 25 years. Ramona got 30. The judge called it one of the most depraved cases of domestic violence he'd seen in 30 years on the bench. I sat in that courtroom and watched them get sentenced and felt nothing. No triumph. No relief. Just emptiness where love used to be. They were going to prison, but that didn't undo what they'd done. Didn't erase the 6 months of agony. Didn't restore my ability to trust. After the sentencing, reporters swarmed me on the courthouse steps. Microphones and cameras in my face, everyone wanting a statement. Kira tried to shield me, but I stopped her. I had something to say. "If you're in a relationship where something feels wrong," I said, looking directly into the cameras, "trust that feeling. Your body knows when it's being poisoned, literally or figuratively. Don't ignore the signs. Don't make excuses for people who hurt you. Don't stay because leaving feels too hard. I almost died because I didn't want to believe the man I loved could do this to me. Don't make my mistake. The clip went viral. Within days, I was getting messages from women all over the country sharing their own stories of abuse, manipulation, survival. Some of them had been poisoned too, literally, with substances in their food. Others had been poisoned emotionally, psychologically, spiritually by partners who claimed to love them while destroying them piece by piece. I started responding to those messages. Started connecting with domestic violence organizations. Started speaking publicly about my experience. Not because I wanted attention or sympathy, but because I'd learned something valuable through my nightmare. Silence protects abusers. Speaking up saves lives. 6 months after the trial, I got a letter forwarded from the prison. From Brett. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was 3 pages of small, cramped handwriting. An apology. An explanation. An attempt at redemption that fell completely flat. He wrote about how Ramona had controlled him his whole life. How he'd never been able to stand up to her. How when the business failed and she'd come up with the insurance plan, he'd felt trapped. He claimed he'd loved me but loved his mother more. That family loyalty had twisted into something evil. He begged for forgiveness. I read it twice. Then I burned it in my fireplace and watched the pages curl into ash. Some things don't deserve forgiveness. Some betrayals are too fundamental, too complete. He tried to murder me for money and convenience. There was no apology big enough for that. But standing there watching those pages burn, I realized something important. I was free. Actually, truly free. Free from him. Free from Ramona. Free from the fear that had haunted me for months. Free to build a new life on my own terms. 1 year after the trial, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment. A bright, sunny place across town with no memories attached. Cooking dinner for myself. Real dinner. Healthy food that I'd chosen and prepared with my own hands. Food I could trust because I'd controlled every ingredient from start to finish. The therapy had helped. Dr. Walsh had specialized in trauma recovery and she taught me how to separate the past from the present. How to trust again, slowly and carefully. How to recognize that what Brett and Ramona did was about them, not about my worth or judgment. I was getting better. Not healed, maybe never fully healed, but better. I'd started dating again too. Nothing serious, just coffee dates and casual dinners. Testing the waters. Learning to recognize green flags instead of just red ones. It was terrifying and awkward, and sometimes I had panic attacks in restaurant bathrooms when a date ordered for me without asking. But I kept trying. Kept pushing forward. Then one Tuesday afternoon, a letter arrived that changed everything again. Heavy paper, official-looking envelope, postmarked from a law office I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter from an attorney representing Gary Whitmore, Ramona's ex-husband who'd testified at the trial. Gary had hired a private investigator after the trial ended. Had him dig into Ramona's past, looking for other victims. And he'd found them. 3 more women who'd been married to men in Ramona's extended family. All 3 had experienced mysterious illnesses during their marriages. All 3 had divorced and recovered. None of them had ever connected their sickness to Ramona because she'd been so subtle, so careful, so good at playing the concerned family member. The attorney was building a civil case. Wanted to sue Ramona for damages on behalf of all her victims. Wanted to establish a pattern of behavior spanning 30 years. And they wanted my help. Wanted me to testify. Wanted me to connect with the other survivors and build a coalition. I called Gary that night. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and kind in a way that immediately put me at ease. We talked for 2 hours. About what Ramona had done to both of us. About the guilt we felt for not recognizing it sooner. About the anger that still burned when we thought about how close we'd come to dying. She's a serial poisoner, Gary said quietly. I've been researching. It's a specific type of murderer, usually women, usually family members, usually using poison because it's subtle and hard to detect. They do it for money, for control, sometimes just for attention. Ramona hit all the markers. And she got away with it for decades because no one wanted to believe a nice suburban mom could be a killer. Over the next few months, I met the other survivors. Teresa, who'd been married to Ramona's cousin and had spent 3 years thinking she had an autoimmune disease. Linda, who'd dated Ramona's brother and had ended up in the hospital twice with organ failure the doctors couldn't explain. Veronica, who'd been engaged to Ramona's nephew and had broken off the engagement when she started losing her hair and couldn't figure out why. We all had the same story. Mysterious illnesses that doctors couldn't diagnose. Ramona always nearby with food and drinks and sympathy. Health that returned miraculously after cutting ties with the family. And years of guilt and confusion, wondering if we'd imagined it, if we'd been weak, if we should have known. We weren't weak, I told them at our first meeting. All 5 of us gathered in a conference room with Gary's attorney. We were targeted by someone who'd perfected her method over 30 years. She knew exactly how to manipulate us, how to gaslight us, how to make us doubt our own bodies. That's not our fault. That's hers. The civil case moved forward. Media picked up the story again, serial poisoner's web of victims revealed. And suddenly Ramona Pierce wasn't just the mother-in-law who tried to kill me. She was a monster who'd spent 3 decades poisoning people who trusted her, destroying lives, and walking away clean. More victims came forward. A woman who'd been Ramona's roommate in college and had dropped out due to illness. A neighbor who'd eaten Ramona's casseroles during a hard time and had ended up hospitalized. A co-worker who'd accepted Ramona's lunch invitations and had spent months in and out of doctors' offices. The list grew to 11 confirmed victims. 11 people whose lives Ramona had poisoned, some of whom had permanent health damage from the toxins. Why? I asked Gary during one of our phone calls. Why did she do this to so many people? He was quiet for a long moment. Control, he finally said. Power. She liked having people dependent on her. Liked being the caring one, the helper, the martyr who took care of the sick. And when people got too healthy or too independent or threatened her control over her family, she made them sick again. It was her way of keeping everyone in line. The psychology was twisted, but it made sense. Ramona had raised Brett alone, making him dependent on her for everything. When he'd married me, chosen me over her, it had threatened that control. So she decided to eliminate me and bring Brett back under her complete influence. Money was part of it, but the deeper motivation was maintaining power over her son. Brett wrote me again from prison. This letter was different. Shorter. Less apologetic. He'd been going to therapy, mandatory for all inmates, and his therapist had helped him see how Ramona had controlled and manipulated him his entire life. How she'd isolated him from friends who might challenge her influence. How she'd sabotaged his other relationships before me. How she'd groomed him to prioritize her above everything else. I'm not making excuses, he wrote. What I did was evil and unforgivable. But I want you to know I'm trying to understand how I became someone who could do that. Trying to break the cycle so if I ever get out of here, I'll never hurt anyone again. He didn't ask for forgiveness this time. Just acknowledged the damage and said he'd spend the rest of his life trying to atone. I didn't respond. Didn't burn the letter either. Just filed it away, another piece of the puzzle of how a family could become so toxic that attempted murder seemed reasonable. The civil case settled out of court. Ramona had assets, the house, some investments she'd hidden from creditors, and the judge ordered them liquidated to pay damages to her victims. It wasn't enough. Money could never be enough. But it was something. Acknowledgement. Validation. Proof that what she'd done was real and wrong and costly. Standing outside the courthouse after the settlement, surrounded by the other survivors, I felt something shift inside me. The anger was still there, but it wasn't consuming anymore. The fear was still there, but it wasn't controlling me. I'd taken something horrific and used it to protect other people. To stop a predator who'd operated for 30 years. To build a community of survivors who could heal together. What now? Teresa asked me as we walked to our cars. What do we do with all of this? I thought about it. About the messages I still got weekly from women in dangerous situations. About the platform I'd accidentally built. About the responsibility I felt to use my nightmare for something good. We help others, I said simply. We tell our stories. We teach people to recognize the signs. We make sure what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else. And that's exactly what we did. 2 years after the night I switched plates with Ramona, I stood at a podium in front of 200 people at a domestic violence awareness conference. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My voice was steady. The fear that had once defined me had transformed into something else. Purpose. Abuse doesn't always look like fists and bruises, I told the crowd. Sometimes it looks like a loving husband making you dinner. Sometimes it sounds like a concerned mother-in-law telling you to eat more. Sometimes it feels like love right up until the moment you realize it's killing you. I shared my full story. The Sunday dinners. The mysterious illness. The moment I found that receipt. The camera footage of Brett poisoning my food. The recording of him saying I had to die. The plate switch that had saved my life. People gasped at the right moments, cried at the emotional parts, applauded when I described the arrests. But the part that seemed to resonate most was what I said at the end. Your body knows when something's wrong. It sends signals, physical, emotional, spiritual. We're taught to ignore those signals, especially women. We're taught to be nice, accommodating, trusting. To give people the benefit of the doubt. To put others' comfort above our own safety. That conditioning almost killed me. After my speech, dozens of people lined up to talk to me. To share their own stories of abuse and survival. To ask advice about situations that scared them. To say thank you for making them feel less alone. Each conversation was a reminder of why I'd chosen to be public about my experience despite how painful it was. One woman pulled me aside, tears streaming down her face. My boyfriend gets angry when I don't finish the meals he cooks, she whispered. Says I'm ungrateful. I've been getting sick a lot lately and he keeps saying it's in my head. Do you think? She couldn't finish the question, but she didn't need to. Trust your instincts, I told her, gripping her hands. And please talk to someone. A doctor. A therapist. The police. Don't wait until you're as sick as I was. I gave her Detective Morrison's card. He'd stayed in touch, had become something like a friend, and he'd offered to help any of my contacts who needed police intervention. Call him. Tell him I sent you. He'll take you seriously. That night, alone in my apartment, I thought about how far I'd come. The girl who'd married Brett felt like a different person. Naive. Trusting. Willing to ignore red flags because she wanted so badly to believe in love. I wasn't that girl anymore. I'd been forged in fire and come out stronger, harder, more aware. But I'd also learned to be soft again in the right ways. To trust carefully. To open my heart while keeping my eyes open. To recognize that what Brett and Ramona did wasn't about love at all. It was about power and money and control. Real love doesn't hurt. Real love doesn't make you sick. Real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your safety or sanity or sense of self. I'd started seeing someone new. His name was Trent and we'd met at a support group for trauma survivors. He'd lost his sister to domestic violence and had spent years working with advocacy organizations. He was patient with my triggers. Understanding when I had bad days. Respected my boundaries without making me feel broken for having them. Our first real date, he'd asked what I wanted to eat and then actually listened to my answer instead of ordering for me. When I'd gotten anxious about sharing food, he'd suggested we each order our own meals and not share at all. Small things that showed he understood. That he saw me as a person with autonomy, not an object to control. I'm scared, I told him on our 5th date, sitting in his car outside my apartment. Scared that I'll never fully trust anyone again. Scared that I'll always be waiting for the other shoe to drop. Scared that what happened to me broke something fundamental that can't be fixed. Trent had taken my hand gently. You're not broken, he'd said. You're careful. There's a difference. You survived something that should have killed you and you're still here, still trying, still opening yourself up to possibility despite every reason not to. That's not broken. That's incredibly brave. I'd cried then. Not sad tears but relieved ones. Someone finally understood that healing wasn't about going back to who I was before. It was about becoming someone new. Someone who carried the scars but didn't let them define her entire existence. 3 months into dating Trent, I did something I'd been putting off. I visited Brett in prison. Not because he deserved it. Not because I'd forgiven him. But because I needed closure that could only come from looking him in the eye one last time and saying my piece. He looked older. Prison had aged him a decade. Grey hair, lines around his eyes, a defeated slump to his shoulders. He sat across from me in the visiting room and couldn't meet my gaze. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But I needed to tell you something." He finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "I forgive you." His breath caught. "Not because you deserve forgiveness. Not because what you did is okay. But because holding on to that anger was poisoning me worse than the arsenic ever did. So I'm letting it go. Not for you. For me." Brett's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry, Sienna. I hate who I was. I hate what I did. I think about it every single day and I—" "Stop," I interrupted. "I don't need your apologies. I don't need your explanations. I just need you to know that I survived. I thrived. I built a life that's better than anything we had together. And I'm going to keep living and loving and trusting despite what you tried to do to me. That's my revenge. Being happy without you." I stood to leave and Brett said my name one last time. Are you doing okay? Are you healthy?" "I'm better than okay," I told him. "I'm free." And I walked out of that prison and didn't look back. The past 2 years had taught me lessons I'd never wanted to learn. That people you love can hurt you in ways you never imagined. That evil can hide behind smiles and family dinners. That your body will tell you the truth even when your heart wants to believe lies. That survival isn't the same as living, but it's a necessary first step. That healing isn't linear or neat or complete. It's messy and ongoing and worth fighting for. But most importantly, I'd learned that I was stronger than I ever knew. Strong enough to figure out I was being poisoned. Strong enough to gather evidence while dying. Strong enough to face my would-be killers and switch those plates. Strong enough to testify. Strong enough to help other survivors. Strong enough to love again despite every reason to stay closed off forever. Now I stand in my kitchen. My safe kitchen where I control everything that touches my lips, cooking dinner for Trent. It's simple. Pasta with homemade sauce, garlic bread, salad. Nothing fancy. But it's made with care and trust and the knowledge that real love doesn't come with poison hidden in the recipe. Trent arrives with flowers and wine, kisses my cheek, asks what he can do to help. We cook together, talking about our days, laughing at stupid jokes, just being normal. And normal feels like a miracle after everything I've been through. Over dinner, he tells me about a woman who'd called the crisis hotline where he volunteers. She'd been getting mysteriously sick and her husband kept insisting she eat the meals he prepared. Trent had given her my contact information, suggested she reach out. "I hope that's okay," he says, watching my face for a reaction. "More than okay," I assure him. "That's exactly what I want. To help people escape before it's too late." We talk about starting a foundation together. Something that specifically addresses poisoning as domestic violence. Education for doctors and police. Resources for victims. A database tracking patterns. Turning my nightmare into something that saves lives. "You've taken something horrible and made it matter," Trent says softly. "Not everyone could do that." I smile, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I had help. Kira. Detective Morrison. Dr. Walsh. Gary and the other survivors. You." I squeeze his fingers. Nobody heals alone. Nobody survives alone. We need each other. It's a truth I've learned the hard way. The same isolation that almost killed me is what healing required me to break. Later that night, after Trent goes home and I'm getting ready for bed, I catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me is different from the one who married Brett Pierce. Her eyes are harder but kinder. Her face is thinner but stronger. Her expression carries both sadness and hope in equal measure. I survived the people who were supposed to love me most. My husband. My mother-in-law. The family I'd chosen to build my life with. They looked at me and saw dollar signs. Saw an obstacle. Saw someone disposable. And they decided my death was worth less than their comfort. But they were wrong. My life wasn't disposable. My body wasn't weak. My instincts weren't paranoid. I knew. Some part of me knew from the first whispered conversation that something was wrong. And instead of silencing that knowing to keep the peace, I listened. I investigated. I fought back. That's the lesson I share everywhere I speak now. Trust yourself. Trust your body when it says something's wrong. Trust your gut when someone's behavior doesn't match their words. Trust your fear because fear is information, not weakness. The world tells women to be nice, to smile, to accommodate, to doubt ourselves. But doubting myself almost got me killed. I think about all the women who don't survive. Who eat the poisoned food one too many times. Who ignore the warnings their bodies send. Who die because they couldn't believe someone they loved would hurt them. I think about them every day and I carry them with me in everything I do. My story could have ended so differently. I could have died in that bed, organs failing, while Brett collected his insurance check and Ramona planned his next wedding. I could have been just another statistic. Another mysterious death. Another woman who slipped through the cracks. But I didn't. I lived. And now I'm using that life to make sure others live too. There are still hard days. Days when I can't eat anything I didn't prepare myself. Days when a stranger offering me food sends me into panic attacks. Days when I wonder if I'll ever fully trust anyone again. Days when the anger comes roaring back and I want to scream at the unfairness of it all. But there are also good days. Days when I wake up healthy and safe and grateful. Days when I help someone escape their own poison situation. Days when Trent makes me laugh until my stomach hurts. Days when I look around my life and realize I've built something beautiful from the ashes of something terrible. The other survivors and I still meet monthly. We call ourselves the Phoenix Circle, women who rose from the fire Ramona tried to burn us with. We support each other, celebrate victories, hold space for grief. Teresa just got engaged to a man who treats her like gold. Linda went back to school and became a nurse specializing in toxicology. Veronica wrote a book about her experience that's helping thousands of people recognize poisoning symptoms. Gary started a non-profit supporting male victims of domestic violence. We're all proof that survival isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new one. A better one. One we write ourselves. 3 years after that Sunday dinner where I switched plates and changed my life, I'm standing at a press conference announcing the launch of the Sienna Pierce Foundation. It's named after me, which still feels surreal, but the other survivors insisted. You're the one who fought back publicly, Teresa had said. You're the reason any of us found each other. Let people know your name for something good. The foundation will fund research into poisoning as domestic violence. Train medical professionals to recognize signs. Provide legal support for victims. Create educational materials about food tampering and chemical abuse. It's everything I wish had existed when I was slowly dying and no doctor could figure out why. At the press conference, a reporter asks if I ever regret going public with my story. If the attention and scrutiny have been worth it. I don't even hesitate. Every time someone messages me to say my story helped them leave a dangerous situation, it's worth it. Every time a doctor tells me they now screen for poisoning because of awareness we've raised, it's worth it. Every time another survivor finds the courage to come forward, it's worth it. My privacy was a small price to pay for saving lives. Another reporter asks about Brett and Ramona. If I think about them. If I hate them. I consider the question carefully. I don't hate them anymore, I say honestly. Hate requires emotional energy I'd rather spend on healing and helping. What they did was evil. They're paying the price for that evil. But my life isn't about them anymore. It's about me. About the people I love. About the work that matters. They tried to write my ending, but they failed. I'm writing it myself now. That night, the foundation launch makes national news. My phone explodes with messages of support, donations, interview requests, and stories from people who've experienced similar abuse. It's overwhelming but also affirming. My nightmare meant something. Changed something. Maybe even saved someone. Trent and I celebrate quietly at my apartment. No fancy dinner. No big party. Just us, comfortable and safe and honest with each other. He tells me he's proud of me. Tells me he loves me. And for the first time since Brett, when someone says they love me, I believe them. I love you too, I say back. And I mean it. Not the desperate, blind love I had before. But something steadier. Stronger. Built on truth instead of fantasy. Built on a foundation that can't be poisoned because I'm finally protecting myself while opening my heart. We talk about the future. Marriage someday maybe, but no rush. Kids possibly, though the idea of being that vulnerable scares me. A house with a big kitchen where we can cook together. Simple dreams that feel revolutionary after everything I've survived. Do you think you'll ever stop being afraid? Trent asks gently. It's a question I've asked myself 1,000 times. No, I admit. I don't think the fear ever completely goes away. But I think I'm learning to live with it. To acknowledge it without letting it run my life. To be careful without being closed off. That's the balance, right? Staying open while staying safe. He nods, understanding in a way only someone who's seen darkness can. You're doing it though. The balance. Better than anyone I've ever met. Later, lying in bed unable to sleep, I think about the girl who walked into that coffee shop and spilled her latte on Brett's laptop. The girl who thought she'd found her forever. Who believed in fairy tales and soulmates and love conquering all. That girl is gone. She died somewhere between the Sunday dinners and the switched plates. But someone new was born in her place. Someone who knows that love isn't enough if it's not backed by respect and honesty and safety. Someone who understands that the biggest threat can come from the closest source. Someone who learned that surviving isn't the same as winning, but it's everything. I survived the people who were supposed to love me most. I survived their poison, their lies, their betrayal. I survived the system that almost didn't believe me. I survived the trauma that tried to break me. I survived, and then I did more than survive. I thrived. That's not a tragedy. That's not a cautionary tale. That's not a story about how love failed me. It's a story about how I didn't fail myself. About how when everything was telling me to ignore my instincts, I listened instead. About how I fought for my life when it would have been easier to just accept my fate. And now I'm here. Healthy. Safe. Loved by people who actually mean it. Building something meaningful from the ruins. Helping others find their way out of darkness. Living a life that's mine and mine alone. They tried to kill me for money. For control. For convenience. They failed spectacularly. And their failure became my greatest victory. Not because I destroyed them, the justice system did that. But because I refused to let what they did define the rest of my life. I am not a victim. I am a survivor. And more than that, I am someone who took her survival and turned it into purpose. Into hope. Into a reason for others to keep fighting. That's my story. That's my truth. That's my life. The one I almost lost and then fought like hell to reclaim. And every single day I wake up breathing is a reminder that I won. Not against them. Against the part of me that wanted to give up. Against the voice that said trusting again was impossible. Against the fear that tried to make me small. I'm not small. I'm powerful. I'm free. And I'm just getting started. So if you're out there right now, sick and scared and wondering if you're imagining things, you're not. Trust yourself. Trust your body. Trust that little voice saying something's wrong. Get help. Get out. Get safe. Because your life is worth fighting for. Your future is worth protecting. And you deserve love that heals instead of hurts. I'm living proof that you can survive the unsurvivable. That you can heal from the unthinkable. That you can take poison and turn it into power. That you can look death in the face and choose life anyway. They tried to end my story. Instead, I wrote a new beginning. And trust me, this version is so much better than the one they tried to kill. If you enjoyed this story and found it meaningful, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We share stories of survival, resilience, and transformation every week. Stories that remind us we're not alone. Stories that inspire us to keep fighting. Stories that prove love should heal, not hurt. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. What resonated with you? What lessons are you taking away? Your words might be exactly what another survivor needs to hear today. We read every comment and we're building a community of people who refuse to stay silent about abuse in all its forms. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.